Yeah, g'day. My name's Cameron Ottenhoff, and this is my presentation on my placement with Flinders University in creating the Beyond the Club podcast. So, who's involved? So, I'm working closely with Flinders University's sport, health, and physical activity sector. This involves Dr. Sam Elliott, who's running that sector, and Kim Williams. So, I'll also be working with quite a few partners. These partners are the Office for Recreation, Sport, and Racing, the Sammy D Foundation, the Alcohol and Drug Foundation, and along with C2M Marketing. So what I do in my role. So my role within this podcast will be very different to other interns who take on this role in the future. So far, my role, as we're only just setting up the podcast, has been heavily involved in the setting up phase. This involves setting up the podcast name, the logo. Both these tasks took weeks of market research and surveys before we finally agreed on a name, which was Beyond the Club. And currently we are working through the logo, and that should be finalised by the end of next week. You can see an example in the bottom right-hand corner. My next major role, which has only just been completed, is the setting up of the podcast room. So at the top, you can see my first attempt at the podcast room that we have here at Flinders University, followed by my second attempt once we realised just how poor the sound quality was in the room. So this was just as you can see, a bit makeshift to go for our very first recording, which was today actually. That was our first test run, and now my current job is to now purchase proper soundproofing equipment. I also control social medias, so this is something that is yet to be set up, but it will involve promoting the podcast with snippets of each episode, like teasers of episodes, and we'll disperse these through our social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. During the podcast productions, I'm manning the episodes and directing the guests. I have my control system there, a Broadcaster Pro, which I then control and make sure everyone is sounding honky-dory. From this, I then edit the podcast, add in adverts and introductions, and cut out any outtakes. I then publish them to all our platforms. Then once we have completed 12 episodes, which won't be until January next year, my job is to then train up the next intern at Flinders so they can take over my role. So that's a big part of my role is to make sure that I can train the next intern and make sure they are fully equipped and they can take on my role easily so that this Beyond the Club podcast can run smoothly into the next seasons. So strategic communication. Well, strategic communication is a purposeful use of communication by an organisation to fulfil its mission. So the mission of the Beyond the Club podcast, which was written by Dr. Sam Elliott, is to expand and sustain a co-designed knowledge translation and dissemination strategy to transform South Australian community sport into a knowledgeable, agile and skilled sector. So in other words, the mission of this podcast is to get years of research that people like Dr. Sam Elliott and Kim Williams, Shane Pill, lots of lecturers and guests that will be on the podcast. The goal of this is to get their knowledge that's inside their head out into the communities so that these communities can actually use that to the best of their advantage. So next we have our internal communications. So internally we have a pretty small team and the majority of communication is informal within this team. So this is all done through emails, phone calls and texts, along with face-to-face chats and board meetings in person for important decisions. This was seen when we had to decide on our name. We had a brainstorming session with all stakeholders, partners, and everyone involved in the team, and we had a board meeting to discuss that. But most of my communication is with Wallace from C2M Marketing. From this creates a communication line that I have to follow. So first I speak to Wallace if I have a question or query on anything, whether it's editing, the logos, the names, you name it, I go to him first. This thing gets moved on to Kim. Kim's the next in line. And if he cannot answer it or if he needs further approval, I then ask Sam. Then my last port of call, if it is even needed, is to then pass on this information to our partners. So for example, with the designing of the logo, that started with Wallace and I working together to get a few artists to design logos. I then spoke to Kim and he narrowed it down from about 7 into about 3. And then we went to Sam and he put in his 2 bobs. And then we've now gone to the partners to now decide on a final logo. Next, we have external communication. Now, up to this point, as we haven't produced any episodes or published any episodes yet, external communication has been a bit limited, but this is a bit of future planning externally and a bit of this and a bit of so far. So the podcast itself is an obvious form of external communication that will be used to get our mission statement across to a large audience. that it gets forgotten that the podcast itself is our biggest form of external communication. And within this podcast, there will be adverts as well to support our partners and stakeholders. So that's another form of external communication that we'll be using. Social media is an obvious one. Will be another mode of external communication we will use to promote the podcast to a wider audience and hope we can generate more listeners. I've also had numerous phone calls and emails and texts, hundreds of thousands, if I'm honest, with external businesses when it comes to setting up. When it comes to the setting up period. So I've contacted businesses like Derringers in South Australia and Pro AV in regards to what gear do I buy, what gear do I need. I've contacted theatrical places in terms of, all right, I need to soundproof this room. What can I get? Can you give me advice? So again, we get lots of quotes. We've done a lot of that external communication to get to this point. All right, so conclusion and recommendations. Well, overall, the communication set up within this small organisation has been excellent, especially for a team that was only just created a few weeks ago. So Wallace from C2M Marketing is the guru when it comes to podcasts. He has a rich history in producing and being part of podcasts along with his marketing history, which is his business. So therefore, he's been my first port of call for everything: names, logos, editing, publishing, you name it. So I speak to him first before I speak to anyone, which saves their time and then also gives me the best use of my time as well. Along, it gives me the best knowledge, knowing I've known from the get-go in this small organisation who I need to speak to straight away to get the results. I don't waste time going to different people from different partners and different stakeholders, asking the wrong questions and wasting everyone's time. So the communication process was laid out very fast early on, and it's worked seamlessly so far. So I'm really excited to see how the rest of this podcast goes, and once we start publishing and editing videos. But yeah, so far that's what I've done. There's a bit of future planning as well. So thank you.